This is James Walker, and welcome to Real Talk, Real People. This is the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people to hear what they have to say about the issues and problems we face as a society. Hello, folks. Thank you very much for joining us again this week. The conversation is about domestic violence and the horrible toll that it takes as it tears apart families. Can you imagine losing two daughters and a granddaughter because some man is filled with rage? My guest today is West Haven resident Karina Martin. She is the founder of Mothers of Victim Equality, that is a nonprofit group designed to help women victimized by domestic violence. And folks, sadly, if anyone can talk about this disease, she can. I'm a strong voice against
Yeah,
domestic violence, and I believe other men should step forward and
yeah.
become a strong voice also. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened and why you decided to start your nonprofit group against domestic violence?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely humbled and honored for this amazing opportunity to speak with you today. Um, I would have to go back to April 20th of 2013. Um, that is the day that my daughter, Alicia Wiley, she's a sophomore at Eastern Connecticut State University, majoring in psychology and minoring in biology. Got into a car of her boyfriend then of 4 years, and then I have to fast forward to April 24th of 2013 when an officer came to do a well check because Alicia had not been heard from since April 20th of 2013. That ensued a 24-day intense search throughout the state of Connecticut for my daughter, which tragically ended um, May 17th of 2013, but was not confirmed until 5/18, May 18th of 2013, that the partial remains that they found the day before were that of my daughter Alicia.
I just can't imagine what it must be like for you to recount that time. Even hearing you speak about it is just very difficult to listen to and imagine the horror that you must have faced during those months until you knew, and then, of course, once you knew.
Well, I mean, good thing that you can't see me because I'm crying, but um, it's extremely, it's still extremely devastating because she had her whole life, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And we were gonna have a doctor in the family, you know. She had her future all mapped out, what she wanted to do, and she wanted to be a psychiatrist and come back to the inner city to work with youth, and give back to her community. And so to excuse me, have it tragically cut short in such a violent way, and it wasn't even good enough for this monster to murder her. He had to dismember her as well. So that made it's like, why? What for?
Now,
All because she didn't want to be with you anymore? I mean, what sense does that make? And so it left my family and I, it just devastated us, and there were so many things throughout the searches and what we had experienced leading up to that devastating day, May 18th. Um, that gave us a lot of unanswered questions, and there were so many concerns. Working within the judicial system in that capacity was something we've never had to do, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, let alone my worst enemy, And so I'm sorry, excuse me.
That's fine.
And so we got together to start our healing journey, and I was already on my own spiritual journey, and throughout like midway through, God had spoke to me and said that this was bigger than me and my family. And when I heard that, when he spoke to me, I thought he was talking about once Alicia gets home, it would be a journey working through her, getting her mentally, um, um,
Well, again.
building her up again. Yeah. And, getting her life built back up. And I never thought, even in the time of the searches, that it would be um, to form an organization, where we would talk about raising awareness about dating and domestic violence, educating and re-educating, eliminating the stigmatism and the misconceptions of what domestic violence is. Up to that point, I only thought domestic violence was just physical. I never thought it could be emotional and mental, psychological, and financial. I thought it was something so in your face that you would be able to know it, that it was happening. I never thought that it could be something so subtle that, by the time you realize you're in it, it's too late. You're completely engrossed in it, or it's so that you're so engrossed in it that you feel like it's too late. In Alicia's case, it was too late because it did creep up. Here it is, she's dating a nurse. She's dating someone whose promise and the whole premise of his career is to preserve life. So why would he take life? So um, the signs and different things that I'm looking back now that I did see that made me feel skeptical about certain things. Um, they were alarming, but they weren't red flags to me because, again, I didn't know about the other facets of domestic violence.
What were some of those flags that you now recognize?
Well, looking back then, that made me skeptical was the isolation. How she would be on the phone when we're at a family gathering, and she would have to go into another room where it was completely quiet and everything because he didn't want her around her, want to all the noise around her, or he didn't want her around us while we were making noise. The way he was controlling her, certain things she couldn't wear even when she wasn't around him, her weight. It was just little subtleties like that they made me skeptical about why was he acting like this, and I did, which I voiced my concern to Alicia. And so she's 20, she's in college, she's a bright young lady, and when you come off like a mama bear who's protecting her cubs, it makes for a very negative conversation. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
Um, right, because you don't want to hear mama telling you how to run your life at 20. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Especially when it comes to your significant other at that particular point in time.
You don't want that
So
at 16, let alone 20.
exactly. So it's like it again, hindsight being 2020, looking back now, what I know now, I would have used then, not to be so pushy, not to be so motherly, but to help her paint her own picture as to what was wrong with the things that I was saying that were wrong, instead of her feeling like she needed to defend him, and then turning even more of a blind eye to what was going on, you know. So once
Now,
once you get past that, you know, now it's like. Ah, but then it's like when you don't know, you do what you know. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Now, I understand. Now, this young man has been tried, convicted, and he's behind bars, and I'm assuming for the rest of his life.
We would assume so, but unfortunately, um, the middle of this year, he put in for an appeal to the Supreme Court. So we're just waiting for that decision now.
And meanwhile, other tragic events also took place in your life.
Yes, unfortunately, well, fortunately, after Alicia, my daughters and I, we formed a nonprofit organization called Mothers of Victims Equality, or MOVE Inc. And it encompassed what I was talking about, raising awareness about dating and domestic violence, the signs, getting past the scrutiny and the misconceptions of what domestic violence was and who it affects. Um, a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, she must have been raised in a home where she saw violence, or she was dating a violent person, or a street person," and that's not the case. And we wanted to bring those awarenesses, especially within the Black and Brown community, to alleviate those misconceptions and those stereotypes. And my oldest daughter, Shakwanika Brody, she's the vice president of our organization. So she was very aware of these heinously horrific, things that can befall within toxic relationships. And but with all that being said, in 2017, August 18th of 2017, um, unfortunately, my daughter Shakwanika was murdered along with my granddaughter Myjaya.
My God.
And she was Nika was 29 and Myjaya was 9. And
And this was done also by her significant other.
this was done by her live-in boyfriend of almost 6 months, who she had prior relationships. She knew him for a while before they, moved in together. And so she knew about the signs. She knew about searching and getting background checks. She did all those things.
And
But unfortunately, you can know how to react, you can know how to act, but you cannot control the reactions and actions of others. And excuse me, when you have a monster that comes in knowing that you're already broken and you're already devastated by such a heinously horrific um, murder to your sister, to then turn around and do to murder you and your child, your innocent child. It's just it's
I can imagine that it is.
I'm
It is.
sorry.
That's okay. No, it is. That is fine. I really admire your courage. This is not a difficult thing to talk about. The loss of a child is not difficult. I know I come from that situation, and I know when I think back to it, and I think about all the violence, and I think about my mother. It still is a very emotional thing to me. I certainly understand, and I can't imagine that anyone who would be listening would not understand and really feel your pain. You're listening to Real Talk, Real People, the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people. We're back with Karina Martin, and we're talking about domestic violence. She is the founder of Mothers of Victim Equality, a non-profit group she has designed to help women victimized by domestic violence. Karina has been telling us about how domestic violence led to the murders of two of her daughters and a grandchild. What happened to this man who took the lives of your daughter and grandchild?
He's now serving an 80-year sentence, which I believe is such a gross injustice to what he did, um, because he came in knowing, that we were already dealing with the devastation of Alicia's murder and dismemberment, and then to come in and not, to do the same thing to my daughter and granddaughter is just to get 80 years is to me is just a gross injustice.
Did he
Um,
explain why he did such a terrible thing? Did he give a statement to the court or anything as to what would lead him to do such a terrible thing?
at the time of his plea sentencing, he didn't give a statement then, but he did give a statement in court at one particular point in time, where Nigeria's father had to be held back because of what he said. And he
Oh,
said, well, she just wouldn't shut up.
wow.
And he was talking about my daughter. She just kept nagging me.
Now, she was the vice president, right, of your organization.
Yes,
And like you said, she knew the signs, she knew the
yes,
danger. And that is the same that for a lot of victims, they know the signs, they
yes.
know the danger, but they don't leave. Why do you think that is?
It's extremely hard. And in her case, she was. And that's another thing that I have to point out. With Alicia, the same thing too. She was leaving. She had ended it with him, but he had asked to see her one last time. And so we have to understand that leaving is the most detrimental time for a victim. It can end up in fatalities, first and foremost. Secondly, leaving is not always an option, especially when you're dealing with emotional, in all retrospects, psychological, physical, emotional, mental, and financial. Sometimes, we have to look at the situation of the victim and the abuser or perpetrator. And if the abuser or perpetrator is the financial supporter, if they're the ones that's holding the whole household together with what they bring in, or if even if the victim is working, but the abuser or perpetrator is taking their money, which is financial abuse in either retrospect, it's hard to leave if you don't have money and you don't know anywhere to go. And a lot of times, because this happens, domestic violence isn't a rapid thing. It's not an in your face abrupt thing. As a survivor yourself, this happens over a period of time, and
Right,
it's a progression. It can start off real subtle, and look so much like, oh, it's just cute love, you know, lovely ways of showing affections to a person, and so you get confused. And then the other thing is the abuser and the perpetrator can make the victim feel like it's their fault, like, or they're crazy, like what they're experiencing isn't what they're experiencing. So there's so many vital factors that we have to factor in when we're talking about why doesn't a person just leave. It's not that easy. And we need to understand that. And so we as family members, friends, even associates, what we can do is we can create a staircase for them, and when I say a staircase, a way of building them up so that they can see the exit, and they can take each step for them to exit, because the CDC says it takes seven to 9 times, or 7 to 10 times sometimes, for a victim to leave their abuser. And then you got to factor in, we love these people. You know what I mean? And then you think that they're going to change. They promise to change. So there's so many things that come into play when we talk about why don't they just leave. And then when you talk about like you from a child perspective, how can you leave when you're a child?
Now, are these some of the things that you hope to bring to light through your group, Move Inc.?
To their organization is yes, is to bring, is to not just educate but empower and engage. You gotta be able to lift up the victims because they're so downtrodden, and sometimes they feel like they're not even worth anybody giving any type of support or love to them because of this is how their abusers or perpetrators made them feel. They beat them so much to that they don't feel like they have life or that their life is worthy. So we teach how to empower and how to engage the victim and even the abusers and the perpetrators, because think about it. In order to solve a problem, you can't just solve part of the equation and think you're going to come up with the solution. You have to have all components of the problem in order to know how to have a right solution. So we can't just help the victims and don't help the abusers and the perpetrators as well, because all they're going to do is go on and create more victims. So that's what we mean by engaging, is we not only engage the victims, but we also try to engage the abusers and the perpetrators in a way that it's not going to affect the victim.
Now, what about resources? Do you think there are enough resources in place for victims of domestic violence?
Oh, that's a catch-22 question, Mr. Walker.
Why is that?
You gotta get me in trouble.
No, no, no. If there are not enough resources, there are not enough
Well,
resources.
I can't say there's not enough resources. I just think there's too many gaps in the resources. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
And that's what Mothers of Victims Equality, our organization, that's where we come in at, is because we're fillers of the gaps, and we're building bridges of those gaps. So where we see there's a lapse in resources throughout national or state or city organizations and agencies, we say, okay, let's go in and let's do this. Let's do a workshop. We have a program called SAVE, which is Supplemental Assistance for Victims of Dating and Domestic Violence, SAVDD. And what that is it helps to support the victims from the time they start their journey in the court system until whenever they feel like they're ready, and even then we still provide support. So because this is a life's journey. This is not something that just ends and stops or begins here and then ends there. And a lot of organizations and agencies, they have timetables. We don't have a timetable because domestic violence doesn't have a timetable, especially the effects of domestic violence doesn't have a timetable. So that's what we address, the effects of the domestic violence in a non-limited way.
And Karina will share more of what she is doing to help victims of domestic violence when she returns here next week. Also joining us will be Meredith Gold. She is the director of Domestic Abuse Services at the YMCA in Greenwich, and she will be here to talk to us about the impact domestic violence has on kids. You've been listening to Real Talk, Real People. If you would like to be on the show, have a comment about the show, or perhaps you have an idea that the show should explore, give us a call at 203-605-1859 or email us at realtalkrealpeoplect@gmail.com. And remember, start your Sundays with my column in Hearst, Connecticut newspapers statewide, and start your Mondays right here at Real Talk, Real People. Have a good week, folks. We'll talk again next week.